Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wife for Life. I am so thrilled to share our guest with you today. It is none other than the fabulous, let me say it again, the fabulous Fiona Arthurs. Welcome, Fiona.
Hello. Thank you so much, Michelle, for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Man, I'm excited for you to share your unique journey with us and all the growth that we're going to experience just by having you here as a professional. And speaking of professional, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So, my name is again Fiona Arthurs. I am married to Paul Arthurs. It'll be 28 years this March 30th.
Woo!
I'm originally from Zimbabwe, and we've been married 28 years, and we have three children. 23, yes, 23. I forget his ages, but it's 23, 20, two girls, and then our youngest is our son who's 18. So they are in that season where they're emerging adults and they're about to launch into life. Everybody's at school, working, and at home, and I'm so appreciative about having them at home because and I often laugh with other people telling them like I really like my kids right now. I really like who they are and
Yeah.
certainly who they are becoming. Because when they were growing up, I didn't always like them. I loved them because I was their mom.
Hmm.
I didn't always love them, and so now having those two working together is so wonderful. Just seeing them laugh together and just if they argue and calling each other out, it's so beautiful to see. But I thank God for our kids. So again, we have three kids. And by profession, I'm a marriage and family therapist, and also I do pastor Wheaton Christian Center with my husband, which is in Carroll Stream, and we have a campus in Aurora as well.
Nice.
And I've a minister to marriages and minister to wives on Facebook and on WhatsApp, and just wonderful to see what God is doing through marriages, through wives, and as we're equipping and empowering wives to build their homes according to Proverbs 14 verse 1.
Nice. See, that's what I love. Okay. Dropping nuggets already. So, listen, let's start at the beginning because just you being from Zimbabwe is unique and special in its own right. So tell us, how did you and Paul meet? Tell us about the journey that led to the Arthurs family.
Well, it's really quite an interesting journey. Now, our parents knew each other. They met in the 80s. They met at John Osteen's church. They're having a conference there. My parents happened to be there, and his parents also happened to be there. And they made a very brief connection, and then they met again at Miles Monroe's leadership conference in the Bahamas, and they really struck up a good connection there. And so over the years, my dad would come to Wheaton to preach at Wheaton Christian Center, and then my father-in-law would go to Zimbabwe. He wasn't my father-in-law yet. We'd go to Zimbabwe and preach for my dad. So they really had a growing relationship. And so when Pastor Arthur's only son, Paul, who I'm married to, was preparing for ministry, his father sent him to Zimbabwe. My husband often says his father sent him to Africa and left him there. Uh, Under the care of my father, and so he was training in ministry. So as he came in, he was a guest of my father, and so he would often come to our home to visit with my dad and my mom, and stay connected to them. And so that's how we met.
Yeah. Now, my ignorant assumption would be, oh, was this an arranged marriage? But tell us, how did the relationship bud?
So this is really quite interesting again. In our culture, when a couple is courting and they want to go out on a date, they
Hmm.
have to be chaperoned. And
Okay.
so when my sister was being courted by the young man who was caring for my wasn't my husband at that point, but for Paul, who was taking care, who was kind of watching over him and helping him, showing him the reins in ministry and things like that, under the direction of my father. He liked, his name is Steve. He liked my sister Laverne, and so you could never really get to Laverne because Laverne is the Archbishop's daughter, and you're not just gonna get to her very easily. But
Hmm.
when Paul came and they're connected, and he found out, oh, Steve likes Laverne, He's like, you know what, I got you. I'm gonna hook you up. So he started coming over to the house, and and when they started courting, when Stephen LeVert started courting, Paul and I were chaperone. So what happens if you go out to a restaurant, you have the couple sitting there on their own, and then the chaperones have to go off to the side. We're watching, seeing what's happening, but
Yeah.
we kind of stuck there, and so we began talking, and we really kindled at friendship. So every time we'd chaperone, we would be there getting to know each other, and it was just strictly a friendship. But then over time, Paul started liking me, and I liked him too. But initially, when we met, we were in our own relationships. But then over time, those relationships ended, and
Yeah.
then he liked me, and then he asked his father if he could, ask for my hand in marriage. His father said yes, and so he came and asked me to marry him. Even prior to that, my parents had said to me, "Hey, my mom had been praying, saying, I see he's coming. He's coming to ask you to marry him, and just so
Ooh,
you know, you have our approval." So that was like 2 or 3 months before he even came forward and said that. And
I
so,
love
yeah,
that.
that's
Oh
how.
my goodness. I love that so much. Nothing like a good love story. I am a romantic at heart. But that is so awesome. And even I love the difference of what we would consider a chaperone is more like your parent being with
Mhm.
you on the date versus your sibling or your older sibling even. So that's unique and different and really like cool to hear about. I love that. And I
Absolutely.
love that your mom already knew. Like she already it's just like a mom. We just see things coming a mile away. We already know.
Absolutely. She said she was praying and the Lord showed her, and so and she shared it with my dad, and my dad's like, "Hey, you have our approval." But it was wonderful for even for him before he asked me to marry him.
Mhm.
He sought his father's approval, his blessing, because he trusted his father, that his father was a man of God and would hear from God
Yeah.
regarding his spouse. And so he prayed about it, and he says, "I have the release. You can go ahead and ask her." And so if his father had said no, which he said no to other girls,
Mhm.
he would listen. And so when his father said yes, he jumped right to it, and he asked me, and I
Ooh,
I said yes.
dang. I might not have had a husband if he'd have asked his father first. I
Oh,
say
how to
that.
believe that.
No, seriously, I say that because I'm 3 years older than my husband. And
Mm.
so, and we married young. He was 23 and I was 26. And his dad was like, hold up, like she's older than you. Are you sure? Is she taking advantage of you?
That's that's funny. Wow.
But I love that the whole family unit is involved because sometimes we think we're making a good decision and we just may not be. So I think it's important to make sure that you involve your parents in that decision making process. So kudos to you guys. So after you guys got married, first of all, did you get married in the US or did you get married in Zimbabwe? Where did you guys get married?
So we had two weddings. Our first wedding was in the U.S. March 30th,
Uh-huh.
and then we went on a honeymoon for 1 week while we were making our way to Zimbabwe, where we had our second wedding on April 13th. So we had two weddings, so that the church family and my family in Zimbabwe could also be a part of that. My parents came here, and I had a sibling who came for the wedding in the U.S., but we needed to have the two weddings, and so we got married twice.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so then you moved to the US and you had to develop roots here. What was that experience like?
It was a very challenging season. When I moved here, my older sister moved. She came here for a couple of weeks, so it was great. Kind of getting to know everybody while she was here. But then time came when she had to go back home, and
Yeah.
so I was left here trying to navigate new life here without my best friend, really, who was my sister. And so I'm here, and I'm here because I'm engaged now to Paul. He moved out the house. I'm living with his parents. We're wonderful people. We're getting to know each other. But then I didn't know anybody else. The only person really I knew was Paul. So he often laughs about this, that he was used to, operating in the boyfriend software. The boyfriend says, "Hey, I'll pick you up, I'll drop you off.
Yeah.
I'm not concerned about your well-being. I don't, you
Mm,
have your own life to live." But then I'm here and I'm looking to him and I'm like, well, you can't just drop me off. If I need to go somewhere, you got to take me. And you are all that I know, even though I was getting to know his sisters and as well. But I'm like, he was all that I knew. And
yeah.
so we went through that season of trying to navigate how to be engaged, how to be individuals, and for me, being in a new setting, not knowing everybody, how do I not let, how do I not make Paul everything that I need, though
Mm.
he had to be, he had
Woo.
to be, because I didn't know anybody else. And so that was a bit of a challenge, because now he had to somewhat separate from his friends and really focus now, because he's engaged to be married, he's a husband to be, and
Yes.
really focus on what was happening with me and making sure my needs were taken care of. So it was a challenging season, up to a time where I said, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm going back. I have a long line of suitors. I can go back, and I'm sure you have a long line of suitors too. So we can just part ways, because this is just too hard.
Yeah.
But I remember his mom coming to my room and say, "Hey, Fiona, God didn't bring you this far to take you back." And that, because I really respected her and I honored her, I said, you know what, I'm going to stay engaged and focused in, on this relationship. And we set a date and we got married and never looked back since. So our
Wow.
engagement period was a little more challenging. Most people go, the engagement period is, all roses and flowers, and it's just beautiful. But it was us getting to know each other, and us
Yeah.
getting to know each other and figure out what we were doing,
Yeah.
especially me leaving my home and coming to a whole new setting.
Man, you said so much in that response that, first of all, what'd you call it? He said he had to learn how to not be in boyfriend what?
The boyfriend mode, because using the
Boy,
boyfriend software,
boyfriend
I'm gonna whine, I'm
software.
gonna dine you, and I'm gonna drop you off. But I'm
Yes.
like, no, wait a minute, I have
And
things
I'm
to
gonna
do.
tell you, that's really a good place to put a pin for us as ladies, because sometimes, especially when we're single and we're dating, or dating intentionally, particularly, or even early in marriage, sometimes we do have to teach our husbands how to be in husband software mode, right? And instead of still being in boyfriend mode. Now, we do have to maintain our individuality, the both of us, but to shift from boyfriend mode and be more engaged as husband mode, to shift from boyfriend mode to covering me in husband mode, those are different things and require different skill sets, and sometimes we have to communicate our way through that so they understand what we need, versus just assuming they would know how to flick the switch and now be in husband software mode, right? When you agree.
Absolutely, I certainly agree. And some of the challenges we're seeing in marriages is because the husband is still operating in boyfriend mode, and sometimes the girl, the wife is still operating in girlfriend mode as well. But the two are not working on becoming one, living
Yeah.
very separate lives. And I agree with you. We should be individuals, but at the same time, we should be making our journey toward oneness.
Yes, yes. And I also loved how you said you couldn't make him your everything. Like, you had to put in the work to make sure you maintained your own identity and found your own path in the US. And that's huge.
Yes, I had to learn to make friends. Again, I had his sisters, but even in the church, I had to go talk to people like, "Hey, I'm Fiona," and just try to get to meet people so that I could develop other friendships outside my husband, who was my best friend. But I
Yeah.
also did need other friends.
Yeah, yeah, that's so good. I've heard oftentimes how we as women lose our identity in our husbands, especially early in our marriage, which is a formidable time. We really should be figuring out, how do we maintain our individual identity and be a wife at the same time. So kudos to you for understanding that early and figuring that out, and trusting your mother-in-law and her I should say advice and input on sticking it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we knew this, we knew that God was in it, but then sometimes our humanity gets in the way. And so
Mm,
when our humanity got in the way, we're like, oh, okay, you know what, maybe maybe this isn't it. But we also we did have a sense that God was really in this. But sometimes we have to know, okay, if God is in this, then we have to set aside our own humanity and really focus on why God is bringing us here together.
yeah, I love that. So, one of the things you shared that I think was so valuable is a situation where when you had, issues, you would go to your dad and talk about your issues, and how Paul was not necessarily happy about that. Tell us about how that went.
So my dad was my everything, and he was such a he was a great father, not perfect by any means, but a great father, and I really respected him as a man of God. And really, my mom drummed that into us growing up, like you need to. He's your father, but he's also a man of God. So that she drummed that into us, so that we would receive the blessing that the man of God would would bestow upon us. And so I totally respected him. He was my pastor, again, my dad, my everything. And so when we got married, my husband started noticing that I would go to my dad, that I would give my dad honor. So whatever my dad said would go, whatever Paul said would be like, well, my dad said, And so my husband kind of called me out on this, like, Fiona, I am now your husband. I am now your covering. And
Mm,
so what I say needs to be what goes, not necessarily what your father says. I'm not saying your father is wrong, but you need to honor my word because now I am your husband. And that was a challenge for me. It was like, wait a minute, my dad knows everything.
yeah,
Uh, but making that adjustment really helped because now my husband felt respected. Before he was feeling disrespected.
yeah,
Even though, I was trying to be a loving wife to him, but because in that era of respect, I respected my father more than I
mm,
did him. Now, the word of God tells me to honor my father, but I need to respect my husband.
yes.
So I was kind of getting those two a little bit confused until he brought that up, and I had to work on say, okay, I'm going to honor my dad, but I'm going to respect my husband.
That's good. That's so good. Now, with you being a counselor, therapist, I know you've worked with couples in the past, and there is something to having a circle of influence, having someone you could go to when you're having trials or tribulations in your marriage. Whether that be a friend, a family member, a coach, a therapist. Um, who was that for you and for Paul? And would you suggest that to anyone?
So our dynamics were a little bit different in the sense, of course, our parents knew each other, a great relationship, and so we would go to our parents when things were going on in our relationships. I could go to his parents. He would tell her, and then he would go to my parents and tell on me, which I didn't always like, because then now I'm getting a call like, "Hey, Fiona, you need to be doing this," you know. And then Paul would be called to the carpet by his parents as well. So what really helped our marriage was that both parents shared the same values. Both sets
Yeah.
of parents shared the same values. So I would say if you're going to look for someone to confide in, to help walk alongside you in your marriage, you need to make sure that you have somebody who's a friend of the marriage, somebody who wants to see you guys
That part.
win. Because sometimes we confide in our friends, but they're not friends of the marriage. And
Mm,
when I say friends of the marriage, that means even though they may, let's say if it's a girlfriend of mine, my husband may not know her very well, but she needs to be very supportive of my relationship. She should not be pulling me away and telling me negative things about my husband.
mm.
If you're confiding
Come
in
on.
somebody and they're saying negative things about your husband and agreeing with you, then that might not be a good person to confide in, because again they're only hearing one side of the story.
Yep.
And so your friend needs to be able to challenge you and really be a friend of the marriage in order for you to receive good, safe, and godly advice.
I love that. I oftentimes tell my clients, let's not get it twisted. I am on the side of the marriage.
Yes.
Just because I am a woman, that does not mean I am on the side of the wife. No, I am on the side of the marriage. The only way we all win is if the marriage wins.
Absolutely. And that's the
Period.
truth. Hmm.
So yeah, so I love that. So what I'm hearing you say is that may not work for everyone.
No, it may not work for everybody. So um, it's good for you to go to a coach, to a counselor, a therapist, to have somebody help you on your journey in marriage. Again, ideally, it can be you. Sometimes you can find a good mentor couple in your church.
Mhm.
Then again, that have a good marriage, a strong marriage, and that are going to support you on your journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I like about them coming to a coach like me or a therapist like you is not only are we there to listen to both sides of the story and discern, we're also there giving biblical principles and tangible and applicable skill sets and tools that'll help you be more successful in your future. And that's the major difference. And that's what I love about choosing someone like us is that, yeah, sometimes that couple can give you awesome advice and maybe even some hints on how to move forward. But we definitely want people to gather some tools to put in their toolbox that can last for the longevity of their marriage, because that's what it's all about, right?
Absolutely, and that's what we're trained to do to be able to provide those tools based on this particular situation.
Yeah,
Because I guess every relationship is going to look different, but
I
it's based
love
on
it.
the
That's
needs
what
of
we're
the
trying
relationship.
to do. Say that again.
Based on the needs of the relationship, then we're going to give you whatever tools you need.
I love it. That's so true. Thank you. So one of the things you mentioned when we talked about issues that you've overcome is that at some point in time you guys even had financial issues. I think oftentimes a lot of people think of pastors and their families in a way that they are always taken care of, but ministry is hard. And I find more often than not, people have this perception that ministers should be satisfied with a life of poverty. What are your thoughts and experiences on that?
Well, it's certainly not biblical, because God is a God of abundance, and
Amen.
you know, God tells even that the Levites, the children of Israel, especially the Levites, He says, "I am your everything. I am your inheritance." So God wants us to have the best of everything, and if God is our inheritance, boy, there's nothing that we would like. And so, going back to just a personal experience, we're in ministry and working a young family, and we're trying to be industrious and increase our net worth, and so
Mm,
we got into real estate, and then everybody knows what happened in 2008.
yeah.
There was just an economic bust, and so we had all these properties, and we went under, and so we had to foreclose on a lot of properties. And I write about that in my book, Stop the Foolishness for Wives, and my husband also has a book, Stop the Foolishness for Husbands, where we
Mm,
talk about these things because we really want to be open and transparent. We're trying to do real estate. Other people are doing real estate. Like, you know what, we can do this too. And so we began to do it. But then when there was that economic bust, we found ourselves way underwater, and again we having to foreclose, and we are under a lot of financial stress.
yeah.
And what we had to do was to be very intentional not to allow financial stress to come between us. We said, okay,
Mm.
this thing is happening, but it needs to happen around us and not between us.
Ooh.
And what we find with most couples, when they're under a lot of stress, a lot of financial stress or relationship stress, they kind of go into that self-preservation mode, and they start to
Ooh.
separate from their spouse because they're experiencing so much distress, so much pain, and sometimes it's just easier to isolate and to separate. And that's all the enemy needs. All he needs is a little foothold for him to come in and cause even a bigger wedge between the two. And so when this was happening between us, we said we gotta come even closer in our prayer life, in our confession, in our love life, making sure that let this thing happen around us, but it should never come between us. Because again, money is a servant. But now, if money is becoming the master of our relationship, things are upside down. Is That's not how it's supposed to work. Money is ought to be a servant, and if the servant is not behaving, then we've got to work. We've got to deal with the servant, but not allow the servant to become the master.
Ooh, oh my goodness, man, that's some sermons up in that response. I mean, that's about 3 sermons you can get out of that response. I love it. One of the things you said that I absolutely loved, I had to jot down, was make sure that we don't go into self-preservation mode, isolation mode, that things are happening around us, but not to us. Man, if that's not a perspective, I don't know what is. Seriously, if we could just get that in our head, we would avoid a lot of unnecessary conflict in our relationships.
And it just happens so
Seriously.
naturally because we're experiencing so much pain and distress, and sometimes you start looking at your spouse as even the cause of
Mm,
some of that pain and distress, and you just want to separate yourself from this person. And again, that's a trick of the enemy. You want to make sure that you're staying close, even praying together. Strongly encouraged. We believe in that couples praying together. When you do that, then you keep the enemy at bay, and you don't look at your spouse as the enemy, because sometimes your spouse has caused some of the distress in your relationship, and the enemy wants you to start looking at your spouse as up. I'm feeling this because of them, and so now I need to separate myself, and I just need to cope with the pain by myself. But
yeah.
you are one. You work on it together.
Work on it together. And that's why I always encourage couples to create a safe space with one another where they can be transparent and genuine and honest, with each other, and not be penalized by being truthful, you know.
Right.
And because sometimes if you did in fact cause, the distress, one, you have to own up to that, but
Mhm.
also allowing your spouse to say, yeah, today is not a good day because I'm being constantly reminded of the decision that you made. And unfortunately, it's impacting me emotionally today, and being able to talk through that and walk through that together is so freaking powerful.
It's so
Um,
important
but I
indeed.
think it creates depth to the relationship. And I think it also deepens the intimacy of the relationship to be able to walk through that together.
Absolutely. And how you walk through it is it's either going to deepen the intimacy or it's going to make it even more shallow.
Yes.
And so that intentionality, okay, this is where we are, this is what I'm feeling, being able to, like you said, being able to talk about those things and giving each other grace on this journey, that's going to really help to deepen the intimacy when you're having those difficult conversations.
Yeah.
That's going to, and not avoiding them.
Yeah.
Sometimes like, oh, she's going through stuff, or I'm going, or he's going through stuff, I'm just going to stay away. No,
Hmm.
be present, even if you're not saying anything, but just your presence can make a huge difference, saying, hey, I'm with you, we're walking this journey out together.
Mm, that's so good. That's so good. I love it. Another part of that too, that makes me think about is in the decision making process that we make sure that we do that as a team.
Right.
Whatever decisions we make, it should be made as a team. I've oftentimes had clients, the wives don't feel valued, don't feel seen, don't feel heard. And yes, the husband is the leader of the home, but God said when you find a wife, you find a good thing and obtain favor. And the best way to utilize the favor that you have is to include your wife in on the decision making process. Because if you do include the wife on the decision making process, and then whatever endeavor you're encountering fails,
Hmm.
then you guys can both accept that because you were included in the process. And so it's the analogy for me is we sink, we swim, we sail, we soar, we do it together.
Right.
But when you take onus to do things apart from your spouse, that's when conflict arises.
Absolutely. And again, unfortunately, many couples are in that trap where when they're making decisions on their own, husbands not including wives, wives not including their husbands. But when something happens, it impacts both of you. And
Yeah.
so it would have been better if you worked on this together. And I think even with that, having a good friendship is critical, is
Yeah.
important, because sometimes we try to do marriage without that friendship base. And studies have shown that couples who are friends, um, who have a good friendship, a growing friendship, can navigate any difficulty that comes in life. Because sometimes you don't feel like being in love, but you know what? Because this is my friend is going to understand what I'm going through, and be able to talk things sometimes even on a friendship level. So couples having that base of friendship is so important. So really want to encourage couples to be intentional about developing that, because when you have that, it's easier for you to talk about the difficult things. It's easier for you guys to involve each other. You're not keeping secrets from one another,
Hmm.
because you really have this base of friendship in your marriage.
Man, I absolutely agree. 1,000%. I honestly feel like my husband is my best friend and I could tell him anything. And I think that's something that we have intentionally worked on over the years. So, speaking of intentionality, I'd like to ask you, now that you're where you're at, 28 and all, what would you do differently knowing what you know now?
That's a big question. So let me think. So individually, I think I would have spent more time knowing who Fiona is.
Yes.
Because before I even got married and leading my first few years of marriage, I was really, really focused on making sure that I had a happy marriage, because I said I'm going to do this once, and because I'm going to do this once, I want to do this well.
Mm,
So, which was very good, and I spent a lot of time pouring over how to be a good wife. But also, I think I would have spent just the equal amount of time figuring out, okay, who has God called me to be? What has He called me to do? My husband would do his best to affirm me and tell me that God's hand was upon my life. But I was not in the space where maybe I could hear it, or putting enough effort into that space. I just wanted everything just to happen, but I really had to seek God for myself and really learn. Okay, who is Fiona? Who's
yeah.
Fiona as a wife and as a mom? But who is Fiona? What does God call Fiona to do? So something maybe I would look at, knowing who I am, doing my self care, and figuring out my journey as an individual. I got married at 21, so I had a lot of growing growing up to do. So
Yeah.
we grew up together in our marriage. So figuring that out, and I think as a couple, focusing on praying together earlier on. It took us
Mm,
11 years to be able to figure that out.
wow.
What we noticed was, um, if we're praying together, we had to work through our challenges before we went to God in prayer. So in
Mm,
other words, even if I went to bed upset, now it's time for us to pray. Like, well, I know God is not going to hear my prayers if I'm holding something in my heart against my spouse.
yeah.
And 11 years later, when we began to do that, it kept our channel of communication very clean, very open, because we wanted God to hear our prayers. So I think even focusing on that would have been really help in our marriage earlier on. So I mean, many things. Certainly, being more intentional about our time together, about our dating. We kind of did it, but we weren't quite as focused. I think even doing that would have been good. Planning out our future, having a strong vision for our marriage.
Woo.
We knew God had brought us together, but maybe even just maybe clarifying what that vision looked like would have been really good, because when couples get married, but what's the vision for our marriage?
Mm,
What are things that are going to be okay in our marriage, things are not going to be okay? What are some of the ground rules that we're going to live by in our marriage? And so I think we would have done that a little bit sooner, kind
yeah.
of crafting out the vision for our marriage.
I love all of the above. I mean, like every single thing you said, I feel like that's what I've been living on for the past 10 years of my marriage. Just recognizing that if we have problems in the marriage, oftentimes it's a reflection of one of us or both of us having problems within ourselves.
Hmm.
Like the problem doesn't manifest in the marriage, it manifests in the individual person. And then we bring that to the marriage. So working on self, like you said, is equally as important as working on the marriage, because when you work on yourself, you then bring this better version of yourself to the marriage. And I say probably 8 times out of 10, it lessens the issues that you would have in the marriage, you
Yeah, I
know.
certainly agree because what we do is we're often projecting onto our spouse the issues
Yes,
that we have within ourselves. And I had to learn this because sometimes there'll be times where I'm not feeling quite as productive, I'm not feeling quite as fruitful, in my own life. So what I would do now is instead of working on me and figuring, okay, Fiona, what's going on? What do you need to change? What do you need to adjust? Now I would project that on my husband,
yeah,
and I'm now kind of looking over the fence, like, yeah, is he working enough? Is he working hard enough? Is he, how many hours is he put into this? And so now I begin to project, but really it was my own issues that I needed to deal with. So making sure to in conflict, as you said, understand what's happening within you, because
yes.
you bring who you are in your marriage. You bring who you are, and making sure that you're giving yourself what you need, so that you're not projecting your issues onto someone else.
That is so phenomenal. I so much appreciate you for joining me today. Fiona, I just feel like another episode is in our future.
I am on. Yeah, I would love it. I would absolutely love it. I've certainly enjoyed my time here today. This has been a great conversation.
Man, and I also feel like offline, we need to talk about other things that we could do jointly since there's so much synergy here. So, thank you.
Absolutely, yes. Well, thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for joining. Thank you guys so much for listening. And I hope you picked up all those nuggets because, man, I couldn't even catch all of them. So I can reiterate them to make sure we all got them and, allowed them to fully deposit within our spirits. But we can always press rewind. Hey, listen and listen and listen again if you need to, because those nuggets are powerful and life giving and life changing. So, I want to thank you guys again for joining us for another episode of Wife for Life with none other than Michelle McElroy, hopefully your favorite marriage specialist. And hey, join us for the next episode. I'm looking forward to seeing you in my stat.